Have you ever felt like there are invisible threads connecting things? That a book on your shelf or the bike leaning against your wall has a secret history you can't even imagine? Tonight, we're going to pull on one of those threads. It will take us back to 1815, to a natural catastrophe so immense that it plunged the planet into a mini ice age, causing an entire year without a summer. And I'll show you how, from that darkness and despair, some of the most brilliant and terrifying ideas of our culture accidentally emerged, as if the world, in its darkest moment, was forced to dream in a completely new way. Hey dreamers, Mike here, and tonight we're going to travel to that epicenter together. Forget about your room, about the day's worries. Right now, you're by my side, and the air you're breathing is thick, humid, and smells of cloves and salt water. We're in April 1815, on the coast of the island of Sumbawa, in what is now Indonesia. It's a tropical paradise, one of those jewels of the archipelago that lives at its own pace, oblivious to the hustle and bustle of European empires fighting over trade routes hundreds of miles away. Before you, dominating the landscape, stands a perfect and majestic volcanic cone covered in a lush jungle. It's Mount Tambora, a sleeping giant that the locals consider sacred, or rather, a giant they thought was sleeping. For a few days now, the earth is groaning. On April 5th, there was an explosion so loud it shook the houses of the small kingdom of Tambora at the foot of the mountain. People are nervous, glancing at the summit, making offerings, but life, more or less, goes on. You, perhaps as a Dutch trader or a local sailor, feel it as an omen. More than 250 miles away, in Java, the British Lieutenant Governor, a certain Sir Stamford Raffles, the future founder of Singapore no less, hears the booms and notes in his diary that they must be distant cannon fire. He thinks it's a naval battle or pirates attacking a remote outpost. In fact, he sends out reconnaissance ships to investigate. Nobody, absolutely nobody, looks at the imposing mountain and thinks it's the source of all the commotion. But now it's the night of April 10th. The calm before the storm is over. Suddenly, it's no longer a rumble. It's a blast that you feel not just in your ears, but in your chest, in your bones. It is the most brutal sound a human being can conceive. 3 columns of liquid, shining fire shoot into the dark sky, merging into a single roaring mass that climbs for miles and miles. Mount Tambora, the sacred mountain, is tearing itself open. What you're seeing isn't an eruption. It's the entire mountain turning into a bomb. The horror barely gives you time to process. From the blown-out summit, an incandescent wave, an avalanche of gas and molten rock, what we now call a pyroclastic flow, pours down the slopes at hundreds of miles per hour, wiping jungles, villages, and any trace of life off the map. The small kingdom of Tambora and its culture disappear in a matter of minutes, incinerated and buried forever. The tsunami created by the mountain's collapse hits the nearby coasts, dragging what little was left standing into the sea. For you on the coast, the only salvation is to run for a boat and get away from the shore as fast as possible. And then, the darkness. Not the darkness of night, but something deeper, more absolute. A thick rain of ash and pumice begins to fall. At first, they're like pebbles, but then they're the size of a fist. The sky becomes a quarry crumbling down on the world. For 3 days, the sun disappears completely. The darkness is total within a 370-mile radius. Survivors describe it as a black hell, a world without light where you can hear only the hissing of the falling ash and the muffled screams of people. The sea around you becomes covered with a layer of floating pumice so thick that ships get trapped. Veritable rafts of volcanic rock stretching for miles form, and some sailors even get out and walk on them. Here's what's really bewildering, the surprise element of this catastrophe. Despite being the largest and deadliest eruption in recorded human history, 100 times more powerful than Vesuvius, which buried Pompeii, the rest of the world has no clue what just happened. Think about it. Today, an event like this would be global news in seconds. In 1815, news traveled at the speed of a sailing ship. To the British in Java, it was still a mystery of ghost cannons. In Calcutta, more than 1,800 miles away, they thought it was celebrations for a military victory. No one connected the dots. No one understood that this giant on a remote island had just injected such a monumental amount of ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere that it was going to change the climate of the entire planet. The mountain hadn't just erased itself from the map, losing more than 4,000 feet in height. It had thrown a veil over the sun. You might think the story ends here, with a devastated island and a dusty silence. But no, this isn't the end. It's just the lighting of the fuse. The real balm wasn't the lava, but that invisible, gigantic cloud that right now, as you float on a sea of ash, has begun its silent journey into the stratosphere. It's rising far above the clouds, above the rain, to an altitude where global winds will catch it and spread it like a brushstroke of death to every corner of the globe. The world doesn't know it yet, but its summer is about to be canceled.
The cloud is invisible to you. A whole year has passed since the Tambora explosion. The ash and sulfur, now a very fine aerosol layer in the stratosphere, have completed their trip around the world. You don't see it, but you feel it. Oh, you definitely feel it. Now you're no longer on a tropical island. You're on the other side of the planet. Maybe you're a farmer in Vermont, New England, or a poet strolling, or trying to stroll, along the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. The year is 1816, and summer refuses to arrive. In Europe, spring has been a disaster. It has rained non-stop. Not a warm April shower, but a cold, persistent downpour that has turned fields into swamps. Rivers, from the Rhine to the Danube, are overflowing, sweeping away bridges and villages. It's now June, the month that should bring sun and warmth, but the sky remains covered by a heavy, lead-gray blanket. The temperatures are more like late October. Grain is rotting on the stalk, potatoes are dissolving in the waterlogged soil, and people are starting to go truly hungry. Religious processions walk through city streets, begging God to take away this divine punishment. No one understands what's happening. They blame sunspots, Franklin's experiments with electricity, the wrath of an offended God. The idea that a mountain on the other side of the globe is responsible is, quite simply, inconceivable. Now, cross the Atlantic with me. We land in New England. Here, the problem isn't so much the rain, but an unnatural, eerie cold. The sun, when it appears, is a pale, reddish disk. There's a strange, dry fog that never quite dissipates, giving the landscape a gloomy, ghostly appearance. You could look directly at the sun at noon without it hurting your eyes, a phenomenon that terrifies and fascinates people. You, as a farmer of that time, planted your corn in May, as always, but on June 6th, you wake up and the world is covered in white. It has snowed. A heavy snow that freezes the tender shoots and kills them. People call it a freak of the weather. They replant, hoping the heat will finally arrive. But in July, a severe frost burns everything again. In August, ice forms on lakes and ponds. People start calling this year by grim nicknames, 1800 and froze to death, or the year without a summer. Panic turns into desperation. There will be no harvest, and without a harvest, the coming winter will be a death sentence for many. The truly surprising element isn't just the bad weather, it's how strange it all is. It's the apocalyptic beauty of the sunsets. That layer of sulfuric aerosols in the upper atmosphere scatters sunlight in a unique way. Every sunset is a spectacle of impossible colors, blood reds, intense oranges, violets and purples that paint the sky in a way no one has ever seen before. They are so vivid and dramatic that people see them as an omen of the end of the world. The English painter J.M.W. Turner, famous for his landscapes, becomes hypnotized by these skies and begins to paint them obsessively, capturing their terrifying beauty without knowing its cause. In Hungary, brown snow falls. In Italy, red snow. The chemical composition of the atmosphere is altered, and its effects are almost supernatural. Birds drop dead from the sky in North America. Crops fail in sync from China to Ireland. The whole world is sick, and nobody has a diagnosis. While famine and food riots spread throughout Europe, those with money can afford to escape or at least isolate themselves from the suffering. They take refuge in their mansions and villas, complain about the awful weather preventing their summer excursions, and light the fireplace in the middle of July. The cold and incessant rain force everyone to stay indoors. For most, this means huddling in the dim light, counting the few provisions they have left. But for a small, privileged group of English expatriates, renting a villa on the shores of Lake Geneva near Geneva, the bad weather won't bring hunger, but boredom. And it's well known that from the boredom of brilliant minds, the most unexpected ideas can be born. You might think the biggest impact of a volcano is geological or climatic, but this is where the story takes an unexpected turn toward the literary. The constant rain, the dark sky, and the gloomy atmosphere of that summer that wasn't created the perfect breeding ground for ghost stories. That group of friends, trapped at home day after day, with lightning illuminating the distant alpine peaks, were about to play a game that would give birth to not one, but two of the most iconic monsters of our culture. The world felt broken, the sky seemed sick, and their imaginations were about to reflect it.
The rain doesn't stop. It's been days, weeks, beating against the large windows of the Via Diodati, a rented mansion on the shores of Lake Geneva. Imagine yourself there with them. The air in the room is thick. It smells of burnt wood in the fireplace, old books, and the ozone from the storms breaking over the dark peaks of the Alps. You are in the eye of a hurricane, but not one of wind and water, but of egos, genius, and boredom. Gathered in this living room are some of the most brilliant and scandalous figures of their time. There is, of course, the host, Lord Byron. At 28, he is the equivalent of a rock star. Famous, incredibly handsome, lame from birth, and with a reputation for excess that has forced him into exile from England. By his side is his personal physician, the young and ambitious Dr. John Polidori, who admires and envies him in equal measure. And then there are their guests. The radical poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, a skinny idealist with a brilliant mind, his 18-year-old lover, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, an extraordinarily well-read and serious girl for her age, the daughter of two of the most important thinkers of the era, and Mary's stepsister, Claire Clairmont, who orchestrated the whole trip to pursue Byron, with whom she'd had a brief and stormy affair. An explosive cocktail of personalities, trapped by the most depressing summer on record. They spend hours reading, discussing philosophy, science, and poetry. One night, to kill the infinite boredom, they start reading a book of German ghost stories called Phantasmagoriana aloud. The tales of specters, pacts with the devil, and reanimated corpses, read by candlelight as the storm rages outside, set the mood. It is then that Byron, always looking for drama, issues a challenge. We will each write a ghost story. The idea catches on. Byron quickly sketches out a tale about a mysterious traveler, but soon gets bored and abandons it.
Shelley, the great lyric poet, also fails to come up with anything that satisfies him. The competition seems destined to die before it even starts. Mary, the youngest of the group, feels immense pressure. She wants to write something memorable, something that, in her own words, would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror. But the ideas don't come. Days pass, and her page remains blank. One of those nights, the conversation drifts to the hottest scientific topics of the day. Galvanism, Luigi Galvani's experiments that made the legs of dead frogs twitch when electricity was applied. They discuss the possibility of reanimating dead matter, the origin of life itself. Could a creature be assembled and given the spark of life? The conversation goes on until the early hours and leaves Mary's mind racing. When she finally goes to her room, she can't sleep. She falls into a waking dream, and it is there, in that borderland between consciousness and sleep, that she has the vision. Put yourself in her place for a moment. You close your eyes, and the image assaults you with terrifying clarity. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. The image terrifies her. The idea of her creation opening its watery yellow eyes fills her with dread. But she also knows she has found her story. The next morning she sits down to write. What begins as a short story for a friendly competition will, with Shelley's encouragement, become one of the most influential novels ever written, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. And here comes the twist that almost no one remembers, the true butterfly effect of that stormy night. While Mary was bringing her monster to life, Dr. Polidori, resentful of Byron's disdain, decided to pick up the crumbs his patron had left behind. He took that fragment of a vampire story that Byron had abandoned and developed it on his own. But his vampire was not the folkloric bestial monster of Eastern European legends. His creation, Lord Ruthven, was a charming, seductive, and absolutely lethal British aristocrat who moved elegantly through the salons of high society. He was, in essence, a veiled portrait of Lord Byron himself. The story, titled The Vampire, was published years later, mistakenly attributed to Byron, which made it a bestseller. Polidori unwittingly created the archetype of the modern vampire, the sophisticated, magnetic predator that would decades later directly inspire Bram Stoker's Dracula and the entire lineage of vampires we know today. Think about it. An eruption in Indonesia causes a year without a summer, which traps a group of bored geniuses in a Swiss villa, and from that confinement, in the very same week, the two pillars of modern horror are born: science fiction with Frankenstein's creature, and Gothic horror with the first aristocratic vampire. But while these monsters of the imagination were being born in the villa, the real world, the world of people who had no time for literary games, was facing a much more down-to-earth problem. The same climate crisis that rotted the grain in the fields was starving the main engine of civilization. Oats and hay became so scarce that the price skyrocketed, and horses, the backbone of transportation, agriculture, and war, were dying by the thousands. This crisis was about to give birth to a very different kind of creation. Not a monster of flesh and blood, but a machine of wood and iron that promised a future without the need for animals.
Leave the literary salons of Switzerland, the ink and the ghosts behind. Our journey now takes us to the heart of the crisis. The air no longer smells of books, but of fear and expensive bread. You are in Mannheim, a city in the Grand Duchy of Baden, in the Germany of 1817. The consequences of the year without a summer are not an anecdote, they are a full-blown economic catastrophe. Food prices have skyrocketed. Oats, the fuel of the era, cost 8 times more than 2 years before, and that has created a problem that is paralyzing society. Look around you. The streets are quieter than usual. There are fewer carriages, fewer riders. Horses, which were the pillar upon which everything rested, transporting goods, travel, agriculture, communication,
are disappearing. It's not that they've gone extinct, it's that they've become an unsustainable luxury. Feeding a horse has become more expensive than feeding a family. People are selling them for meat or simply letting them die. It's as if today, suddenly, the price of gasoline multiplied by 10 and half the world's cars, trucks, and tractors stopped working. Civilization as you know it is grinding to a halt. In the midst of this paralysis, there is a man who sees not just a problem, but an engineering challenge. His name is Karl von Dries. He is not a dreamer or a poet. He is a baron, a civil servant, a master forester, and above all, a prolific and practical inventor. He is a man who looks at the world and asks, "How can I fix this?" He sees people struggling to move, to transport goods, and his mind gets to work. If the animal engine has failed, couldn't humans become their own engine, but in a more efficient way? The idea that forms in his head is radically simple. Imagine a vehicle that allows you to move faster than walking, but without the need for a costly animal. A vehicle powered only by human force. After several sketches and prototypes, he comes up with a design. Now, step into his workshop. What you see is a strange, almost comical contraption. It's two wooden wheels, one behind the other, connected by a wooden frame. There's a small seat and a handlebar to steer the front wheel. That's it. There are no chains, no gears, and above all, no pedals. This is the Lauf machine, the running machine. To use it, you have to sit down and literally run. You push off the ground with your feet, alternating one and then the other, and then, once you pick up speed, you lift your legs and glide, maintaining your balance. Picture the scene, a respectable man in his top hat and frock coat, sitting on this wooden horse, kicking his way through the dirt streets of Mannheim. It must have looked ridiculous, the eccentricity of a bored aristocrat. But Dries is convinced of his invention. On June 12, 1817, he decides to do a public demonstration. It's his moment of truth. He gets on his Lauf machine and sets off on a journey from the center of Mannheim to a coaching inn called Schwetzinger Relighthouse, about 4.7 miles away. People watch him, some with curiosity, others with ridicule. But he keeps going, pushing, gliding, balancing. He completes the round trip in less than an hour, a speed that doubles that of a walker. It works. He has proven that it's possible. He has created the first form of personal transportation in history that doesn't depend on an animal.
And this is where the story turns bittersweet. The surprise element is that, despite the success of the demonstration, the invention was a spectacular commercial failure. The press mocked it, calling it a hobby horse or dandy horse. It was considered a toy for eccentrics, unworthy of a serious man. Furthermore, it was incredibly difficult to ride on the roads of the time, which were ruts of mud and potholes, designed for horses' hooves and the wide wheels of carriages, not for the thin wooden rims of his velocipede. Pedestrians complained that these contraptions got in their way on the sidewalks, and the authorities were quick to act. The running machine was banned from the sidewalks in Mannheim, then in Milan, Copenhagen, and even as far away as Calcutta. The invention born of crisis, the brilliant solution to the transportation paralysis, seemed destined to be a footnote in history, a forgotten whim. But even if the world wasn't ready, the idea was out there. The seed had been planted. And as Drais struggled to convince a skeptical Europe to get on his wooden contraption, the shockwaves from Tambora were wreaking havoc in very different ways in other corners of the planet. The same famine that inspired Drais to invent a machine was on the other side of the Atlantic, inspiring people to move, but not on wheels. It was causing an exodus.
Entire families of farmers in New England, like a certain Smith family in the state of Vermont, saw their crops die for the third year in a row and abandoned everything. They packed their few belongings and joined a mass migration westward in search of more fertile lands and a new life. A journey that would sow the seed of a new and controversial American faith. And even further away, in the Yunnan province of China, peasants who had lost their rice crops to the cold and rain discovered that there was one plant that did thrive in these adverse conditions, the opium poppy. Their desperate decision to survive would forever change the economy and history of Asia. Drace's running machine didn't change the world overnight, but the idea of personal, animal-free mobility had been born from the ash. And while that idea struggled to sprout in the mud of Germany, the volcano's echoes were causing religious and economic earthquakes on distant continents.
And here, in the quiet of the night, is where all the loose threads of our story come together. The journey has taken us from a burning island to a non-existent summer, from a Gothic villa to a German workshop. Now, it's time to see the whole tapestry. It's time for the big reveal, when the seemingly disconnected dots connect into an astonishing picture. Stay with me. Let's go back to Carl Dreiss's running machine, that brilliant and ridiculed invention. Although it was an initial failure, the idea didn't die. It was too good. The concept of a personal, two-wheeled vehicle that needed no fuel or food lingered in the imagination of inventors. A few decades later, in the 1860s in France, someone had the brilliant idea of adding pedals directly to the front wheel. The velocipede was born, also known as the bone shaker for how uncomfortable it was. But the progress was unstoppable. Then came the chain drive, wheels of the same size, rubber tires, and by the 1880s, the safety bicycle was a reality. It was fast, efficient, and it changed the world. It gave unprecedented freedom of movement to ordinary people, was a key tool in the emancipation of women, and transformed the design of cities. Everything, absolutely everything, started with that wooden contraption Dreiss invented out of pure necessity, because Tambora had starved the horses. Now let's jump the ocean again to that farming family, the Smiths. As we left them, the frost of 1616 drove them from their lands in Vermont. Like thousands of other families, they migrated west in search of a future. They settled in Palmyra, New York. This region was known as the Burned-Over District, a place famous for its intense and successive religious revivals. It was in this atmosphere of spiritual fervor that their son, a young man named Joseph Smith, claimed to have had his first celestial visions a few years after the move. That forced migration, that search for a new life initiated by the ash of a volcano half a world away, placed him in the exact time and place that would culminate in the publication of the Book of Mormon and the founding of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. One of the most influential American-born religions, born indirectly from the icy breath of a volcano. And finally, let's travel to Asia, to the Chinese province of Yunnan. The peasants, desperate because the anomalous cold had ruined their vital rice crops, realized that the opium poppy was much more resilient. They began to cultivate it on a large scale to survive. This massive increase in opium production within China came at a terrible geopolitical moment. The British Empire had a huge trade deficit with China because it imported vast quantities of tea. They needed a product that the Chinese would want to buy to balance the scales. Opium, now more abundant and cheaper thanks to the climate crisis, was the perfect lever. The British promotion of its consumption unleashed an epidemic of addiction, which led to the Opium Wars, the ceding of Hong Kong, and what Chinese history knows as the Century of Humiliation. A geopolitical tragedy of massive scale,
It's fire fueled by an agricultural decision made by desperate peasants under a darkened sky. Do you see it now? It's the butterfly effect in its purest form. A single geological event on an Indonesian island in 1815 unleashed a cascade of consequences that no one could have predicted. The veil of ash that covered the planet caused climatic chaos. That chaos trapped a group of poets in a villa, giving us the gift of Frankenstein and the modern vampire. At the same time, it starved the horses of Europe, which led to the invention of the direct ancestor of your bicycle. That same cold drove a family from their farm in Vermont, setting in motion the chain of events that would found a new world religion. And in Asia, it pushed farmers toward poppy cultivation, exacerbating an opium crisis that would redefine relations between East and West. Art, technology, religion, and geopolitics. 4 pillars of our modern world, all of them shaped invisibly and profoundly by a mountain that exploded on the other side of the globe. There was no master plan, no obvious logic, just a chain of cause and effect, a ripple that travels through time and space, connecting the death of a horse in Germany with the birth of a literary monster in Switzerland and the destiny of a prophet in America. It's proof that history is not a straight line, but an intricate and fascinating web. And now, as you prepare to sleep, think about those silent connections. Think about how the world is a much more complex and magical fabric than it appears at first glance. The story of Tambora teaches us that nothing happens in isolation. An event in a forgotten corner can paint the skies that an artist admires, can inspire the machine that an inventor builds, can shape the beliefs that a culture embraces. It's an idea that, rather than being unsettling, can be deeply comforting. It reminds us that we are part of a vast interconnected system, a dance of consequences that goes back long before we were born. Let that thought cradle you. Feel the weight of your body on the bed, the gentle rhythm of your breath. You don't need to understand all the connections. You just need to float in the current of history, knowing that even the darkest winters can, in the most unexpected ways, give birth to a new summer full of wonders. The world is full of these secret drifts, waiting to be discovered while you dream. Before you drift off completely, I'll leave you with a few questions for your subconscious. I'd love to read what you think, so leave me your answers in the comments below. Which twist in this story surprised you the most? Do you remember a small moment in your life that had huge, unexpected consequences? What other butterfly effects do you think are waiting to be discovered in history? If you enjoyed this drift through time and want to explore more hidden connections like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of our future nighttime expeditions. Thanks for joining me tonight. Take care and sweet dreams.